Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my Canada or Gilles-Villeneuve post-race reaction. What was your thoughts on this race? I would give it probably a good solid 7 out of 10. It had some good action on track, it had some pit stop strategies in play, and we got a little bit of turmoil over everything. It just wasn't quite what we were expecting at the beginning of this race. I know we were all hoping for a nice, Max Verstappen and Russell, tussle, which didn't really turn out to be the case. We had a good start from Russell that kind of got in front, and then we kind of played it, by ear from there. We were hoping that Max Verstappen would put a little bit more pressure on Russell, but we got some more action on the back with, Kimi and Oscar, as well as Lando, of course. And that kind of played everything together for the front. And then, of course, the mid-pack was, fighting tooth and nail for all those points. That made it quite interesting in where there was going to be a one-stop race or a two-stop race, and if you were going to undercut them or overcut them. So it was overall a fairly good race in my view. But what was your thoughts on this race? Like normal, I'll work my way from the back of the pack to the front of the pack, going through each driver and tell you what they did, what happened to them, if I know what happened to them, and a little bit of insight of how I feel they were driving during this race. We start off with Alexander Albon, who started off in 9th and ended up in 20th due to a DNF or a PSU unit. He actually lost 3 spots on the very first lap, so he had a fairly poor start. He did pass Hadjar on lap 13 for 11th place and passed Gasly for 18th on lap 47. And again, his PSU had issues, and he had to pull off on lap 49 around turn 11. Kind of pulling off to the side, getting behind the barrier, so it didn't cause any long-term yellows or safety cars. So really good job from him in that regard. I know he was kind of frustrated and had a little bit of tussle at the very beginning where he ran off course and had to come back on where he couldn't quite make it around the outside or keep that outside spot. And so that made him lose a couple of spots at the very beginning. And he just kind of played it from there. He was trying to base things off of, where he was and where he was going. So I think he did a decent job, even though his power unit was kind of failing on that regard. Yes, he had a little bit of trouble at the beginning, which is probably his fault. But overall, I think that power unit was hurting him throughout this race and just made him kind of get into that zone where he wasn't able to really perform to his top peer. Then we come to Liam Lawson, who started off in 19th and ended up in 19th. He also had a DNF because of a power unit. He actually made it all the way back to his pits before stopping on lap 57 due to that PSU issue. He did start from the pit lane due to a PSU swap in Parc Ferme. So that made me kind of wonder about those Racing Bulls and where they were on those power units pieces. He was not having the greatest race overall. I think he was kind of lacking in that qualifying as well as in the race. And so he was kind of put aside. So hopefully they can keep that power unit going and have it strong for the next couple of races and really can show what he can do. But right now in this Canadian GP, he really kind of lacked what he really needed to show, I think. He's been in that Racing Bulls for a little while and really needs to start showing what he can do to keep that spot for next season. Then we come to Lando Norris, who started off in 7th and ended up in 18th. He had a DNF after hitting his teammate Oscar on lap 67. He had a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 29, switching from a set of hards to a set of mediums, and then going to lap 47 on those set of mediums before switching back to a set of hards. He did pass Alonso for 6th on lap 11 and passed Lewis for 2nd on lap 15. And then he had a contact with his teammate again on lap 67, knocking his front wing off, kind of going for that spot that wasn't there. Kind of misjudged, I think, the air drag. And so he kind of got sucked back into his teammate, I think, a little bit quicker than he was expecting to. And I was hoping that opening was going to open up to his left of Oscar, which never did happen. So he kind of came in and ran into the back of his teammate, knocking his complete front wing off, and that lost all that downforce on that straightaway. And he just kind of slid off into the wall right before turn one, causing a safety car that ended the race overall. So it kind of made the end of the race fairly dull. Unfortunately, he didn't quite make it into the qualifying, making a little bit of a mistake. So he started back a little bit farther than he should have for Lando. And then I think it was just that pressure of him, trying to potentially get past his teammate. He was able to really get past him to some degree, but not quite to the degree that he could have really held on to that spot, because he was ahead a little bit before that, coming around that corner. And I think he was just trying to, had the best chance of getting by his teammate. And so he was in that DRS, fully functional, fully pushed out, hoping for a little bit more room on the outside when there was not any room at that point in time. So that was a big fault of Lando's, and that will cost him dearly, because the points that he loses there in this race is going to be significant, putting his teammate that much farther ahead instead of just resigning himself to be that fifth position behind his teammate. So overall, not the greatest race for Lando, even though he started off poorly. I think he did a decent race up to the point where he crashed, made that faulty judgment error, because I think he was gaining ground on his teammate and getting him back up into the points, kind of pulling that gap down, but he got a little bit too jealous in that regard and made that faulty judgment at the last minute and costed him all those points for this race. So flip of a coin, how you look at that. Poor qualifying, poor ending, good middle section of this race. So you have to take that for how you want to see that run by Lando. But unfortunately, I think that the pressure's getting to him during the season, as he thought he potentially had a chance last season and saw it slip away, and he's seen it slip away this season as well for that Drivers' Championship. Then we come to Lance Stroll, who started off in 17th and ended up in 17th. He did a two-stop race, stopping on lap 24, switching from a set of hards to another set of hards, going to lap 51, and then switching to a set of mediums. He passed Albon for 13th on lap 24 and passed Gasly on lap 45 for 17th. He also got a 10-second penalty for forcing a car off track, and that kind of hurt him overall in his standings. And then they just, ended up in the very back of the pack in that regard, one lap down, passed behind everybody else. Not having a great day for Lance Stroll. I'm not sure what's going on with him, if his hands are still bothering him or if there's something else that's causing some issues, especially with his teammate being so far forward. He needs to really get the grips of what he needs to do in that Aston Martin and really shine and get more competitive towards his teammate in these last few races. So hopefully that can come together for him. As we know, there's not a whole lot of pressure on him getting kicked out of the team. So the question is the injury to his hands going to be what causes him to retire, or is he going to stick around for another few seasons with his hands getting that treatment that they claim they've gotten? Then we come to Isaac Haijar, who started off in 12th, ended up in 16th. He had a 3-spot grid penalty for impeding in qualifying, where he was kind of driving in the middle of the track. He thought the other person was not on a hot lap and ended up causing some issues for signs. And so he got a 3-place grid penalty for that. So he started off in that 12th position, a little bit farther back than what he qualified in. He did gain 1 spot on the very first lap, and he did a 1-stop, stopping on lap 13, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and then going the rest away on those set of hards. He did pass Gasly for 15th on lap 43. Other than that, he was kind of a dull day for Isaac Haijar. I think he was kind of lacking what he needed in this race to get around those people and to keep up into those point range for him, dropping back into that 16th position. That 1 stop didn't really play out quite as well as I think a lot of the teams were hoping it would in this race. Probably hoping for a safety car, earlier on instead of the one at the late that just ended the race. So with the strategy kind of misplaced, I think, trying to jump ahead, it was still a worthy choice in that regard, just in case something happened. or things would have played out slightly different. But it's 2020 vision. It's always good to see from after the fact, but never during the fact. So I think overall, the strategy was fair. It just didn't work out this weekend for him. And his driving, I think, was decent. It just wasn't quite where he needed to be. And he had needed to be a little bit more in the game during those qualifying sessions, so he wasn't going to impede in those. You just stay off the racing line if you're not on a fast lap. Then we come to Pierre Gasly, who started off in 20th and ended up in 15th. He had a one-stop strategy as well, stopping at lap 53, switching from a set of hards to a set of mediums. He started from the pit lane due to PSU changes in Parc Ferme, so he started off at the back of the pack, and during that, because of that change, and he passed Isaac Haijar for 16th on lap 66. Other than that, he was kind of having a fairly bad day getting past because of that strategy that he was on, going so long on those set of hards before switching to that set of mediums, that he got up front in those front running positions, but of course couldn't hold on to it because of those worn out tires, which caused him the grief that he ended up slowly falling back into that 15th position. Still not a bad run for Pierre Gasly. I know after that horrible qualifying session and issues during practice sessions, trying to get the grips around that car. So decent job, just not where they want to be overall, I think. Then we come to Gabriel Bortoleto, who started off in 15th and ended up in 14th. Doing not quite as good job as I would have liked him to see. Having a one-stop strategy, stopping at lap 49, switching from a set of hards to a set of mediums, and passing Albon for 11th on lap 23, which he's not quite able to get there. Do that experience, or is that some other issues that he's having in that? But he's doing a so-so job being at his rookie season, getting steady experience, but not really competing with his teammate in that regard. So a little bit lacking, I think, on his driving point in the race season. I think he should be able to put things together a little bit closer and be closer to his teammate. So we'll see if he can, learn those mistakes that he made and figure out where they are. If that was just a, strategy on, Kick Sauber's, fault in this race, putting him back into the wrong spots. We come to another rookie, Franco Colapinto, who started off in 10th and ended up in 13th. One of his better qualifying sessions this season, starting to get a grip in that Alpine. Unfortunately, he dropped back into that 13th spot overall. He did a one-stop strategy as well. He only went to lap 14 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards and going the rest of the way. And I think that hurt him in that strategy front. Should have gone a little bit longer, possibly, on those mediums. But of course, everybody else is pitting, so it's hard to tell when or not when to pit. He did swap places with his teammate Gasly for 15th on lap 36. Then we come to Yuki Tsunoda, who started off in 18th and ended up in 12th. He had a 10-spot grid penalty for passing under the red flags during practice sessions. Even though it was a damaged car, they counted that against him. So he got a 10-place grid penalty, so he started back in 18th instead of 8th. So not horrible qualifying, but not quite where his teammate was on that front. And making it all the way back to 12th was not quite as good as I would have liked him to do. He should have probably gotten into the points at least in that Red Bull. So hopefully he can put things together in the next couple races and really shine and really get that Red Bull to click. I know that a lot of people are complaining that second Red Bull is just super hard to drive, and basically only Max can drive the Red Bulls. And so it's better for Yuki if he would have stayed in the Racing Bulls instead of getting promoted. He did have a gain one spot at the very first lap, so a decent start for him. And he did a one-stop, stopping on lap 56, switching from a set of hards to a set of mediums. He passed Albon for 10th on lap 22, passed Isaac Haijar for 14th on lap 64, and passed Franco for 13th on lap 65. So, as again, a decent run, but not quite where we need Yuki to be. We need to get him up into the points to support his teammate in the Red Bulls to push forward on that constructor standings, especially when McLaren, has a DNF and drops out. It would help to take advantage of those situations for Red Bull. Then we come to Oliver Behrman, who started off in 13th and ended up in 11th. He had a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 18, switched from a set of mediums to a set of hards. He passed Gasly for 16th on lap 44, passed Isaac Hydrar for 15th on lap 49, passed Franco for 14th on lap 57, and then I have him passing Franco again for 12th on lap 61. So I'm not sure exactly what happened during that few lap period, but apparently Oliver Behrman had to pass Franco Colapinto a couple of times to get up into that 12th position, which then he got bumped up into the 11th due to Lando, crashing. So overall, I think Behrman's doing a decent job. This race didn't quite pan out for him in that strategy. His kind of opposite strategy from his teammate, where he was starting off on mediums, whereas Ocon was starting off on hard. So that kind of let Ocon get a little bit ahead of him, getting quite into the points, but being on the very edge of the points again is a good sign for Oliver Behrman. I think still a decent run, decent passing on track, can keep him, into the point close range. So I think he's doing a decent job this season, and this race was overall, I think, was a decent race for him as well, even though it didn't quite show up for the point way that he would have liked. This gets us to our top 10, where we find Carlos Sainz, who started off in 16th after getting impeded and missing out on that qualifying session, and ended up in 10th. So got just into the points, and that's great for Williams to keep into the points, especially when their other, teammate Albon was not able to complete this race. He did a one-stop, stopping on lap 57 from switching to a set of mediums from a set of hards that he went most of the race on. He did pass Borletto for 13th on lap 17, passed Behrman for 11th on lap 17, passed Albon for 9th on lap 20, and then passed Franco for 11th on lap 60. So besides that, qualifying session where he didn't get a lap in early enough to be on the board to get past that qualifying session and then getting blocked, I know he's really frustrated, but I think he did a really good job in this race, coming back and getting into the points in that Williams. I know Williams were thinking that they were going to be a little bit farther up on the grid overall and fairly potentially, fighting in that top rung. Unfortunately, that didn't turn out quite that well this weekend, but I think Carlos did a decent job of trying to recover from that bad qualifying instance and ended up getting Williams back into the points. So I think a really good job for him in the race, even though the weekend probably wasn't the greatest for him overall. We come to Esteban Ocon, who started off in 14th and ended up in 9th. He had a one-stop strategy as well, stopping at lap 57, switching from a set of hards to a set of mediums. He did pass his teammate Behrman on lap 13 for 13th and passed Isaac Hydrar for 12th on lap 13 as well. So I think his strategy worked out for him. He was one of the few people that's had that one-stop strategy that I think it kind of worked out in their favor with everybody else pitting around them and getting the cleaner air where he didn't have to really fight and push forward in that run to get around people. So it allowed him to get bumped up into those positions. I think he did a really good job overall, especially since he didn't quite start where he wanted to, but did a decent job overall and got Haas a couple of more points. The constructor standings, keeping them in the running in that solid position. So really good job from Ocon, even though he got out qualified by his teammate. I would have thought most of the time he was able to get ahead of him during this race and get those points where he really needed them. Starting off on those hards kind of played out to his advantage instead of the mediums. And then we come to one of my stars of this race and last race as well. It comes to Nico Hülkenberg, who started off in 11th and ended up in 8th. He did gain 2 spots in the very first lap. He did a one-stop as well, stopping on lap 19 from a set of mediums to a set of hards. He passed Gasly for 14th on lap 35, passed Lawson for 13th on lap 36, passed Yuki for 11th on lap 49, and passed Sainz for 9th on lap 57. I think Hülkenberg has done a fabulous job in these last couple of races, being able to get into the points and getting some solid points for Stake Kick Sauber in this run. Really showing what he can do, really showing his talent when he gets a somewhat decent car behind him. So hopefully at one point he will be able to get a podium and get that longest running time before a podium stat behind him, and that'll be really cool to see. I think Nico Hulkenberg, I said, was doing an excellent job this race and an excellent job last race as well. So hopefully he can continue this in the next few races and make this a steady state instead of a one-off. And hopefully with those changes that they brought in, that is really helping them in that regard. And so it'll be more common in that regard, even though I know some of his comments, after the race were saying, you can just throw everything away and start over for the next race, because you can't just assume that they're going to be into the points again the next race. So we'll have to see how that plays out for him in that regard. Then we come to Fernando Alonso, started off in 6th and ended up in 7th. He had a 2-stop race, stopping at lap 15 to switch from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and then taking those hards to lap 50 before switching to another set of hards. He did pass Gasly for 16th on lap 20, passed Stroll for 13th on lap 22, passed Albon for 12th on lap 23, passed Yuki for 10th on lap 29, passed Sainz for 9th on lap 34, passed Ocon for 8th on lap 38, passed Yuki for 11th on lap 54, and passed Hülkenberg for 8th on lap 62. So he did a lot of on-track action as well as getting up there in that running, doing a really good job. I know at one point I laughed hearing him over the radio saying that this was not a practice session, this is a race, so he didn't need to be gentle on the tires. And that tended to work out for him this race, so hopefully he can continue that the next few races, getting back into the points where we'd like to see Fernando Alonso even potentially competing with those Ferraris. So I know he didn't quite get to the competing with the Ferrari mark this time, but hopefully he can kind of get that car back into that running where he can really fight those Ferraris as well. And then we come to Lewis Hamilton, who started off in 5th and ended up in 6th. He had a 2-stop strategy as well, stopping on lap 15, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and then going to lap 45 on those set of hards before switching to another set of mediums. Now, apparently, I didn't see this, but apparently I heard this after the fact, that he hit a groundhog around lap 9 that did some floor damage to his car, and so that kind of hurt him in this run, and that's why he didn't quite get up quite as far in the top 5 that he was going to like to do. So it's an interesting thought. Hopefully he can get that worked out for the next week if he doesn't have that damage, and he can really show what he can do in that Ferrari. He did pass Albon for 8th on lap 20 and passed Ocon for 7th on lap 21. And that gets us to the top 5, where we see Charles Leclerc, who started off in 8th and ended up in 5th. He had a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 28, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, taking that set of hards to lap 53 before switching to another set of hards. He had a quiet race, kind of all by himself. I know on the radio you could hear him arguing with his team about when he should pit and what tire he should be on. So that was kind of interesting to see them kind of ignore that advice that he had, thinking that he could go a little bit longer on that set of mediums to start off with. And then, when he was switching back to another set of hards, he was like, why we go to the hards? The mediums seem to be, good for us at this point in time. So there'll be some debrief issues, I think, for Charles Leclerc in that Ferrari team to figure out, what should have played out in this race and what they can learn from this race. He did a decent job, as I said, making it all the way up to 5th. So decent some points for Ferrari, but not quite where they wanted to be. And hopefully, I know he was probably looking for that podium positions as well. So didn't get a lot of action, but a decent drive for him to maintain that pace and those tires around this course. So I think it was a decent race for Charles Leclerc, even though it may not have shown on paper. Then we got to Oscar Piastri, who started off in third and dropped down to fourth. He did lose that spot at the very first lap, so not quite the greatest start that he could have had, and wasn't able to regain that position. He did have a two-stop strategy, stopping on lap 16, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and then taking those set of hards to lap 45 before going to another set of hards. I know he was trying to play, the game with, the Mercedes and Max Verstappen. And of course, Max Verstappen's the first one to pit, and so that kind of pushed them into a, strategy that probably weren't quite as well. And I know he was complaining about the degradation on those back rear tires over the front tires compared to the practice sessions. And so that probably played into this as well. They didn't quite have the balance they wanted in that McLaren this weekend, and it didn't really look that great in that McLaren all weekend. So they need some work to be done to dial that McLaren in these kind of a weird, for some of these situations like Canada provided with the dusty track and the heat levels that they were experiencing. But overall, I think Oscar maintained that position, did a really good job after he got into that position, didn't let the pressure of his teammate gain on him, push him and make mistakes overall. So I think a good drive for him, even though he lost that position on that first lap. So good job for Oscar, playing the long game over the short game. And this leads us to Kimi Antonelli, who started off in fourth and ended up in third. He did gain that spot at the very first lap, so passing Oscar was a really great move, and then that kind of played out for the rest of this race, being able to maintain that position. He had a two-stop strategy, stopping on lap 14, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and then going to lap 38 on those set of hards before switching to another set of hards. I have him passing Hülkenberg on lap 17 for fifth, and of course he was the driver of the day, and I kind of agree with that, having that rookie be able to finally get his podium and be one of the youngest drivers to be able to get a podium. Overall, I think it's the third youngest driver to be on the podium. So that was really cool to see. If I was going to give it to Kimi, I probably would have given it to George, to being able to maintain that lead over Max and not fall to the pressure or have a collision with Max overall. And if it wasn't for George, I don't know, maybe give it to Fernando Alonso or something, or Nico Hülkenberg again in that running for that back of that top pack, being able to pull those cars back into contention with those top runners. So who would you give the driver of the day? I mean, I'd be interested in hearing that as well. This gets us to second, and we have Max Verstappen. He started off in second, ended up in second. He did pass Hülkenberg on lap 15 for fifth, and he had a two-stop strategy. As I said, starting off all the pit stops on lap 12, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, going to lap 37 on those set of hards before switching to another set of hards. Other than that, he had a really clean race, not having to have to pass, kind of being in there. He did put some pressure on George at the very beginning and at the end a little bit as well, so that was kind of cool to see, but not quite being able to really have the car to make that pass, but hoping for a mistake from George to be able to take advantage of that, and then putting that pressure but letting George stew, but not really have that mistake that made, maintaining that position, not going for any kind of weird gaps that were going away or anything to that effect, and really not putting pressure on that 1 point penalty that he would have gotten potentially, that everybody was hoping for in this race, to drop him out and have that race banned. So he still has that, but it'll, he didn't let all that pressure and all the scrutiny, determine how he drove in this race. And so I think he did a really good job on that front in this race and maintain what he was and get some points and really gain some ground on Oscar and Lando as well. So that's good to see. And of course, this leads us to their front runner, George Russell, who started off in first and ended up in first. He had a two-stop strategy, stopping on lap 13, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards. and then going to lap 42 on those set of hards before switching to another set of hards. And of course, that was mainly dictated by Max Verstappen trying to cut him off, making sure that he wasn't going to undercut George in that running. And so that kind of played into that run instead of having them run their own race. But that was worked out well for the Mercedes. And he did a good start to keep the lead. Didn't really have the fight that we were potentially hoping for between Max and George in that first corner. He was able to make that corner decently ahead of Max, and so we didn't have that pressure in that front running position. And he did pass Alonso for 5th on lap 15 and passed Charles Leclerc for 2nd on lap 26. He also got the fastest lap for the weekend during the race, near the end of the race. So that was good to see as well, that he could have that pace at the end as well, even though Lando was making some strides in that regard before he crashed. So how that played out, we can see how the race went on lap 5. Russell had a 0.55 second lead over Max. By lap 10, it was a 1.53 second lead over Max. At lap 15, we had a little changeover because of the pit strategies. So we had Oscar with a 3.6 second lead over Lando. And at lap 25, it was a 2.58 second Lando over Charles Leclerc. And then we get back into the order by lap 35. We had a 4.7 second lead for Russell over Max. And then 55, it was down to a 2.2 second lead for Russell over Max. And lap 65, it was a 2.8 second lead for Russell over Max. And of course, we had that safety car come out on lap 67-ish that went through the full race, into the race, and so was under the full safety car. So of course, those gaps dropped at the end of the race, but it didn't matter because it was all ended under safety car conditions and kind of made it a boring end of the race, but had that spectacular, crash between Lando and his teammate, which we were all wondering if that was going to take out both, team members in that McLaren. But fortunately, Oscar was able to continue and get some decent points and stay in the lead. So we'll have to see if that puts the nail in the coffin for Lando not getting the Drivers' Championship, or if he can claw his way back in the next races before the end of the season. So what did this do to the driver standings? Of course, we can see here that Fernando Alonso was able to jump Liam Lawson and Oliver Behrman up to that 16th position, now with 8 points. And we see Esteban Ocon jumping over Isaac Hydjar for that 9th position with 22 points. Oscar still maintains the lead with 198. Lando stays at 176. Of course, Max gained some ground now with 155, and George with 136. So there's going to be a little bit closer running for that driver's standing. And for the constructor standings, we have, Kick dropping back to that 9th position, with Aston Martin jumping over them now with 22 points. And we have Racing Bulls dropping back to that 7th position, with Haas jumping them now with 28. We have Ferrari dropping back to that 3rd position with 183, with Mercedes jumping them now with 199. And of course, McLaren still in the lead with a significant margin, now with a 374. Well, what's coming up next? We have a weekend off, and then we go over to Austria for the Red Bull Ring on June 28th. It has a length of 2.683 miles and will have 71 laps being run on the GP race for a total race distance of 190.420 miles. It was first introduced in 1970, and the lap record holder is currently Carlos Sainz in 2010 with 1 minute and 5.619 seconds. So until then, I will see you on the grid, and farewell.